Right, so what I was talking about today was a research project led by Edinburgh University, involving also my colleagues Fiona O'Hanlon, Rachel Ormston and Susan Reid, which is looking at attitudes to Gaelic in Scotland, public attitudes to Gaelic. It's based on the Scottish Social Attitudes Survey, which is an annual survey, and we were funded mainly by the ESRC, but also the Scottish Government and the Gaelic Board in Scotland, Board na Gaelic, to investigate in an objective fashion attitudes to Gaelic. This has never been done before. There's never been, unlike in Wales, there's never been systematic surveys of people's attitudes to the language. And one of the reasons for this is that there's a strong political consensus in Scotland that Gaelic matters. There's been investment in the language from across the political spectrum, the Conservatives in the 1980s, Labour and the Liberal Democrats in the early part of the last decade, and now the SNP government, Scottish National Party government in Scotland today. And right across the spectrum, there's a belief that Gaelic should be fostered, that it would be unfortunate for Scotland if the language were to die out. There's been a great decline in Gaelic over the last century. And investment in things like Gaelic medium education, very often drawing on the model, very successful model of Welsh medium education, and Gaelic broadcasting, again following the Welsh example. And also in Gaelic as having public status. For example, the Scottish Parliament has bilingual signage, and many local authorities, especially in the north and west of Scotland where Gaelic is more widely spoken, have bilingual signage on roads, for example, very similar to that in Wales. And so we were interested in whether the public supports these views, and more deeply whether they associate Gaelic with aspects of Scottish identity or with Scottish politics. Now, one of our headline findings is that there is very strong support for Gaelic. Many people, 76, three-quarters of people, believe that Gaelic is an important part of Scottish heritage. And they also believe that Gaelic ought to be encouraged. Two-thirds of people thought that Gaelic should be encouraged. Over 40% of people hope that more Gaelic is going to be spoken in 50 years' time than at present. And many people would choose, for example, to place their own children in Gaelic medium education. Currently, less than 1% of people, of children, are in Gaelic medium education, but at least about 25, a quarter of people say that they would place a child in Gaelic medium if they had that option. And this has already generated in Scotland quite a lot of political debate about how that could be met, because there's a shortage of Gaelic-speaking teachers who could staff the expansion that would be required in that respect. So we have found very favourable views to the language, and also views that from an academic research point of view are very interesting. People do believe that education is very important to the future of the language. They also believe that broadcasting is important to the future of the language. But in particular, when you ask them what are the most important factors, they mention families and communities on the one hand who speak Gaelic, passing it on to their children, and also education. And in an interesting way, that bridges one of the major debates within language study, which is a debate between those who think that education can sustain and revive small minority languages and those who believe that education will never work and it has to be done within the home. And in Scotland, people seem to believe that these two things should work in harmony with each other, which in policy terms is what's happening. We also went on, and we're currently investigating this question as to what the kind of wider politics of Gaelic is. And we will be further looking at the relationship between attitudes to Gaelic and attitudes to wider aspects of Scottish culture. But what we can say here is that people don't regard speaking Gaelic as essential to being Scottish. It's not like perhaps in other countries, maybe including Wales. It's regarded more as a cultural symbol. That if you think of Gaelic, you think of it as something that epitomises Scotland culture. It makes Scotland different from other parts of the world. That's one thing that you can say about the cultural symbolism of Gaelic. People also think, according to the evidence in the survey, believe that speakers of Gaelic should have rights. That's a very politicised question in Scotland at the moment, as to how far the right, for example, to Gaelic medium education should extend, or how far you should have the right to use Gaelic in dealing with the health service or in being a witness in a law court. Gaelic doesn't have any of the legal status that Welsh has in Wales, but there seems to be quite widespread support for that. Even a minority, maybe of a third to about 40%, believing that these rights to use the language should extend across Scotland, but certainly a very clear majority believing that in areas where Gaelic is spoken widely, that people should have the right to use Gaelic in the courts and public meetings and the NHS, and should have the right to access Gaelic medium education for their children. So clearly there's a kind of political consensus around the promotion of the language. One of the questions we will be looking into over the next year then, as Scotland moves towards having a referendum on independence for Scotland in September 2014, is how much the use of language, the attitude to language, is associated with wider views about the future of Scotland. It currently commands political consensus, but there is a question as to whether that political consensus is associated also with a language that might be seen in kind of classic terms to be associated with particular projects of national independence. And we will be reporting on that set of findings, the research we'll be doing on that in due course. We'll publish it in the usual kind of places, but make it available also through our websites.